My focus for the last 5 years has been around our learning and technology framework, starting with our one-to-one beta classrooms that we had, and then now in our full implementation of one-to-one at grades grades 4 to 12, and then also we have increased access K-3. So, like for example, today I was with second grade teachers talking about different things, learning in their classrooms and what might be some possibilities, and then I was in a fourth grade classroom today, so every day is in different classrooms in different schools across the district, working alongside teachers and students just around how to integrate digital tools into learning, but also when to not integrate digital tools into learning. So it's very much about a balanced approach, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So tonight is really about family conversation and family dialogue, and how do we engage in those conversations around things like smartphones and laptops and computers and TVs even, and everything else, and how, what are some strategies, tools, things that you can use at home right away tonight, but also how can it be that ongoing conversation. So it's always interesting in talking with parents, because my husband, who's here, Roger, he teaches 7th grade here at Blackhawk. The role, like I've been doing this role for 5 years, but really the role that I've had the longest when it comes to increased access, be it to a tablet or a laptop. My children have been in one-to-one longer than I've been doing this job, which means that I've been a parent of a child in one-to-one longer than I've been doing the role that I am in currently. So being the parent hat for me comes on really easily, because that is something that I'm really used to, and we've had those ongoing conversations. So you'll probably hear some stories from the parent perspective as we go along too. So really what I hope that you walk away with is ways to have those conversations at home, and what are some tools that you can use, what are some strategies, things like that. So before we get started, I kind of wanted to get kind of a feeling of what levels from a parent perspective that you're at. So how many of you have children that are elementary age? Okay. Middle school aged. All right, high school aged. Out of high school and in college, or adults. Okay, so that has been quite the journey. For Roger and I, our daughter was in elementary, our son was in middle school when we started. Now she's in high school and he is in college, and it's just really interesting how those conversations grow and evolve throughout the whole thing. So I'm going to try to speak to all the levels as we go along tonight, but I also I introduced Roger already, he's back there, and he will chime in at different times. And then I want to introduce Rob Franchino. He is one of the assistant principals at Eastview High School, also a parent in the district. So he is also going to be chiming in, because this is very much a collaborative effort. What we're going to focus on tonight is we're going to start by talking about our learning and technology framework, and the reason that we want to start there is because that really drives our why as far as utilizing it for learning. So it drives why we just make decisions on utilizing technology for learning, and why we sometimes step aside from it. So we are going to start by grounding ourselves in the framework, which is what we do all the time. It's kind of like in our DNA at this point. Then we're going to define digital citizenship. That is one of the components of the framework, and really talk about how do we define that, what does that mean. Then we're going to talk about a process that we went through this last summer around developing digital expectations, and some of the thinking that went around that, but then also what are some tools that you can utilize with those digital expectations in your own house. So we'll talk about that. Developing a family media plan, which has actually become very easy to do that, and it's a really good tool for conversation and dialogue and really setting those expectations. I want you to walk away with some conversation starters, ways to really continue that dialogue and it going ongoing. And then we're also going to talk about device management options. What might be some options out there depending on what devices that you use, but we always want to talk about mentoring and then monitoring, and what roles do both of those play, and different things like that. So that is kind of our focus for the night. But feel free at any time if you have questions just to raise your hand, and we want this to be just like with everything else, an ongoing conversation. So we are going to start with our learning and technology framework, and we're going to start with a video developed by the district, really of our story of learning and technology.
So here we go. What do you think is the most important issue that is affecting our country today?
We want to thank the community for the generosity and foresight.
Share. This is what we think as a class.
Oh, that's cool.
That is cool.
Thank you for allowing us to help teach our kids, to help them with digital citizenship.
We are right in the middle of our full implementation of one-to-one to increase access.
To give every kid a device and make everything equitable, all of a sudden we've got everybody on the same playing field.
Technology is embedded in everything I do. It's a new way of curriculum. It's a new pedagogy.
There are a lot more things that you can explore and you wouldn't necessarily be able to with like a book or a paper all the time.
At a high school level, students are seeing that learning isn't just about within the four walls of the classroom.
For FindLaw's digital marketing department, I was the first ever high schooler to be interning here. I learned so much, like soft skills to actual technical skills. I learned to actually communicate thoroughly and the networking.
Industry needs to be committed to providing resources and the time, and the commitment. Schools, on the other hand, they need to be committed to changing rapidly, and that's something we see in 196.
It's not about one person holding all the knowledge, so that community partnership is really, really important, because then it means the learning is going to happen beyond our pre-K-12 system.
What inspired them to be a writer?
At the middle school level, that increased access is providing students the ability to have a voice in that conversation.
We use it for studying, we use it for taking notes, checking our grades.
Being able to communicate, yeah, it's been a huge game changer.
The more ownership they have, the more engaged they're going to be. I have more time for us to be able to do activities that are important for them as they grow.
By providing this atmosphere where they focus on their passions and what's important to them, it does things that it's hard to explain. It's hard to describe.
It looks like you've made some vials of the different types of soil.
I love the fact that the digital tools provide her the capability to be hands-on.
Today I'm going to be showing you how to do division.
Our one-to-one classrooms that we have at elementary are really utilizing it to integrate into units of study.
It's really helpful and it's a good resource.
It's changed the way I teach 100%. It changed the way that the kids learn 100%.
We're going to show how these differences look in the iPads using Seesaw. I don't think it replaces science notebooks, but it becomes an enhanced part of it. Open your notebook to find the code. It lends itself to the bigger idea of preparing our students for the 21st century.
It feels great to be a part of that, to work together, to move forward with the future, because this is the future of education.
Everybody wants to be part of growing and learning together. That really brings that one district infinite possibilities. So in that video, what I love is that you see multiple tools being used, not just digital ones, but you see the vials that the students take the images of. You see the notebooks and the chart paper, and you see students utilizing different tools in different ways. And that really is the biggest piece that grounds our framework. It's just that whole idea that it's about how we use the tools that we have available, both digital and analog, to have the best learning environment that we can possibly have. And so we really ground it in our framework. And so there's 4 areas of our District 196 Learning and Technology Framework. The first one is access and analyze information. So we really strive to, when we're using digital tools for researching, that we are being really critical thinkers of information. And so we do that in a number of ways. So at the elementary level, we really try to focus on utilizing the databases that we have available. Our district has purchased databases, plus there's databases as part of, in the state of Minnesota, the state purchases some, and then we have those available because we're residents of Minnesota. And so we really try to help guide the students in a unit of study. Right now, fourth graders are big into their geography unit of study, where they're studying like the regions of the United States and things like that. And so what we'll do is utilize different databases like Culturegrams, TrueFlix, Encyclopedia Britannica, Kids InfoBits, Pebble Go, and we'll talk to students about searching strategies within those different tools. And the reason we talk about those is because we know everything in a database has been vetted. It's been vetted by a group of people, usually media specialists or people that are, researchers. And so the students know by going to a database that every piece that comes in front of them from that search is a good quality piece, it's a credible source. And so at the elementary level, it's really about helping them see that by going to a database, it's like going to a library online. Like you go to the library, you know every book's a good book. Somebody decided to purchase the book to put it in the library. So it makes it really easy. So a database is kind of that same kind of feeling, and it helps students start to see how can we get to credible information for the research that we're doing. At the middle school level, we might start to introduce different searching strategies. So things like, how can I get myself to the best information? So it could be, we were doing genetic, like I was in a middle school classroom a number of years ago and we were talking about like genetic mutations. And so we started to look up genetic mutations and we would notice that you get, the pages and pages and millions of hits. So how do we narrow that search? So we talked about what we call a site colon search. It's the way search engines work. So you could do genetic mutations and then do site colon edu. And by putting site colon edu after that search, then all of a sudden you're going to get sites that are either university sites or college sites. That's a different kind of search than seeing .coms. And so students start to see the difference between URLs and start to read the language of that to help them get credible sources. And then as you move to high school, it's how do you utilize your critical thinking skills to really think, is this a credible source, or should I be finding multiple sources to see that they're saying the same things, or how am I finding out who that source really is? So it's really how do we help students not just access information, but also analyze it to make sure it's credible and reliable. The second component is collaborate and communicate. So we want to, when we're using digital tools, to use them to collaborate and communicate in a way that is really supportive, a way that is constructive, and a way that helps us learn. And so this to me is an area where we really get to talk about digital citizenship because we can do it in a way that helps them see the impact of their actions in a space that is safe because we see each other in our classrooms too. So an example of this would be, I was in a fourth grade class actually last week, and students had made ebooks about their hydrology and petrology unit, and we used a Schoology discussion, and the students all uploaded their books to the discussion. And then what they did was they downloaded each other's books to read them, which was amazing. Like you're watching them see this library of books and they're reading each other's book. But the really amazing part was when they wrote to each other about what they learned. And so in the discussion, what you started to see was this thread of learnings based on what each other published. And it became really powerful and a really powerful conversation. So helping students see that online dialogue can really build people up, and it gives us a really authentic space to do that. Innovate, create, and publish. So we have students in different, like at the end of a unit of study, or at the end of a unit, or even in the middle of a unit, creating and publishing pieces in a lot of different ways. I spend a lot of time in the elementary right now. That's kind of with the way that our instructional support is laid out, so I spend quite a bit of time in elementary right now. And so they were 5th graders, and they have been studying e-bunting, and they were creating Spark videos about what they had learned about e-bunting. It could have been about her books, it could have been about her life, but they use things like icons to give a visual representation and then use their voice to explain their understanding. And then they post those in something like Schoology or Seesaw or a place where then others can listen to their video. But listening to students' voices and listening to their understandings, giving them a place to construct is really another part of our framework. And then the last part, which is one that we really see woven into the other 3, is digital citizenship. And this is really about how can we provide opportunities for authentic dialogue around the decisions that we make when it comes to digital tools. So I talked about collaborating and communicating, how that's just a really authentic space, but it's also in accessing and analyzing information. Being a critical thinker when you're doing a search is a digital citizenship skill. So how do we help students really see that? Because many times we sit in the digital citizenship is about being nice to each other online. That's kind of like the space where we sit. But it's also about how do we critically think when we're online. So if something comes to us, I'm thinking about more like now a teenager, something comes to us on our text that it could be a rumor. We have to think about, is it credible? Is it reliable? Where is that source coming from? Those critical thinking skills need to be part of everything that comes to somebody online, not just taking it for what it is. If they're a high schooler on a Twitter feed and they see something, they need to not just think, oh, that's fact. They need to have those critical thinking skills. So how can we use our work in the classroom for accessing and analyzing to help really bring those critical thinking skills to life? And then Innovate, Create, Publish, when we talk about digital citizenship there, if a student is going to use an image that they got online, first they should make sure that they have, that the usage rights allow them to do that. So we teach about how do you filter by usage rights. And then also you need to give credit to where that image came from. That's a digital citizenship skill. So we talk about digital citizenship doesn't stand alone, even though it's sitting here as one piece. It's really how do we weave it into the conversations that we have during our units. So those are the 4 components of our framework. And this is the blue sheet. I forgot to say that. So the blue sheet, that was the front side, and now this is the back side. So along with the 4 areas, we also have 4 key messages. And these really, again, drive what we do. So learning is the driver of when and how we use digital tools. So when working with teachers, when working in classrooms, we always start it with what do we want the learner to know and be able to do? And how will we know that they learned it? And then that helps us decide, is this a tool that we want to use? Would it be better to have it done on paper? Would it be better to utilize the units of study books? So we have these conversations. For example, I was talking about the geography unit for 4th grade. We never start with the databases. We always start with the units of study books because we want students to get enough information from those books to be asking curious questions before we get into a search on those online databases. So we use the print text to help us develop good questions that then we can move on to the online text. So it's always how we think about the learners and the learning, and that drives when and how. There's also multiple tools in our ecosystem, and I think the video does a really good job of explaining that and showing that. You see the bios, the chart paper, you see students having notebooks and books, along with, in this case, the iPad. You don't see it being everything on an iPad or everything on a laptop or everything digital. We try to have a balance because we want to use the best tool for the task. And sometimes that means it's not a digital tool. I think I shock people when I say it, but then if I'm working with a teacher or a group of teachers and they're like, we really want to do this, and I'll be like, well, let's get the paper out for that. And they'll be like, really? I'm like, yes, let's do that because that's the best tool for the task. So it's really about thinking about that. We want learners to create, and a lot of times we think this is stuff like podcasts and movies and digital posters and digital books, but really we also want them to be creating relationships. We want to have those conversations. We want them to see the different perspectives of others, and how do we really learn from each other's perspectives. So we want to really see creation as so many things. And I always say if technology isn't helping bring us together as people, we need to put it away because it's about being together as people. And so how do we help continue to build those relationships and those understandings of each other? And then harnessing the voice of the learner. So so many stories. So in our beta years and even now that we're in full implementation, teachers will tell me about students that all of a sudden they will have made something. Many times it's like a math screencast where they've explained a concept or created some sort of podcast, and all of a sudden a voice of a student that you hadn't heard from comes out. Probably one of my favorite stories is of a student that made a math screencast, and at the end of the screencast she says, well, I hope you learned more about it than the math concept, because I didn't know anything about it until I made this video. And that video brought the student's voice out, brought the understandings out. So how can we really harness those voices and bring those perspectives in? And also, that really, at times, they see that they're making a contribution to their community. So how can we keep going with that?
We see a lot of it where students are collaborating in the high school level, where we got some feedback from our students, and one of the number one assessments that they felt was important was getting student feedback. So with the iPads and with Google Docs and our Colab, students can get that feedback back and forth from each other. Another thing about harnessing the voice, when we were putting this all together, there's a technologist named Alan November who actually came to our district and helped us guide some of our practice. He was telling a story where a young girl was failing English, an 8th grade girl was failing English. And when he was visiting the school, he was talking to the girl, and he said, well, why are you failing English? Your teacher said you're not handing anything in. Don't you like to write? She said, I love to write. But if I'm going to spend my time writing, I'm not going to spend my time writing for one audience, my teacher. So she ended up having a writing blog where hundreds of kids were going and reading her content. She loved to write, but the media that we had set up in the traditional format allowed for one person to see her writing. Where she said, you know what, my writing is more important to me. I'm going to spend my time writing for an audience that lots of people can see. So that's now where this technology has allowed students to broaden their horizons and see lots of different venues where people can look at their work and assess their work and collaborate on their work. We weren't able to do that back 4 years ago when we didn't have the framework to allow students to share their ideas. So we're seeing it a lot at the high school level as well.
I'll just give an example. The other half of my job, besides being an English teacher, is also a digital resource teacher. So I get to work with teachers and students and go into the classrooms here at Blackhawk. And I think that whole thing about learning is let learning be the driver. For me, whenever I'm coaching a teacher, my first question is, what do you want your students to learn? And many times the teacher looks at me and then they're like, oh, that's right. You're not in here to sell me to use the iPad. You're in here to, really look at what is it that I want my students to learn, and then we choose the best method. And like Jenny said, is it paper? Is it the notebook? Where do we bring in the iPad or Chromebooks or laptops? So just having some great conversations with teachers about that affects your students as well, because because we want them to have those multiple tools throughout the day.
And that whole balance part to me is the most important part, because in our lives as adults, in our kids' lives, we want to have that sense of balance and purpose for whatever we're doing. And so it's really about being intentional about that. So as we're thinking about having those conversations as a family, it's really about purpose and intention. Why are we using name the device or the tool, and is that, you know, is that going with the intention that we have as a family? Like having those conversations around purpose and intent are really important. You know, when you're having a conversation around what or if, or in our case at our house, not, for a device to be at the dinner table, it's really about purpose and intent. What's the purpose? What's the intent of eating dinner? Like those really help drive why that would be there. I think about our conversations at home. Now I'm putting my parent hat on. I took off I coach teachers to my parent hat. But like the conversation around devices being in what rooms in the house. So we made a really conscious decision early on that devices aren't in the bedrooms, including TVs. And you know, that was really intentional because we wanted them to sleep. And it's interesting, both of our kids now being more grown, they really like to sleep. So they're like, I want my 8+ hours, I want, you know, they want that. So, you know, even if they fight you, in the end, they really like that they get to sleep. But what was interesting is our son, when he turned 18 and he was getting ready to go to college, and this is where I'm going with purpose and intent, he goes, well, I'm 18, I got money for graduation, I want to buy a TV for my dorm room, can I have it in my bedroom? Because that's been a no up until now. And I remember we both looked at each other and were like, okay, so we can say no until he goes to college and give him absolutely no guidance. Or we could say yes and be able to be there to give some guidance before he goes off to college. And we went with the second one, and he had the TV in his room, and you know, you'd think it would have a big impact, but he still saw his room as his place for sleeping. So it really didn't affect him the way we thought, but we also were able to give him guidance. So there isn't like one hard, fast rule, so it's really about purpose and intent. And in that case, it was the purpose of giving guidance.
And it's tough to parent now. I totally get it. I see heads nodding. I have a 24-year-old, a 21-year-old, and a middle schooler, all from the same marriage, with a caboose, right? So my younger one, my 12-year-old, says, well, that's not fair. Lauren and Mike were allowed to do that, the older one. I said, you know what, you're right, because mom and dad are smarter. We learned what not to do with the older two, and now we kind of have a restart in middle school. And it's about having those transparent conversations. And when we have these conversations in high school with parents, it ends up being like parenting 101, like sharing ideas on how to do it. We're going to get to a little bit of that, but it is tough. It is really tough. We did this in elementary school a couple of weeks ago, and it's like, this is wonderful because you get to set the framework right from the get-go, right? They don't have a phone yet. They don't have an iPad yet. So you get to set the expectation right from the get-go. We always say less clear communication, voids are going to get filled. And if kids fill the voids, it's going to be different from what you want as a parent. That's just the way the mindsets are. So when you're at elementary school, it's a lot different to fill the void because they don't have an expectation. So my youngest daughter had an expectation of how her older brother and sister did, and guess what? It was tough. It was challenging to change the paradigm and the mindset of what we did in our house because the other two older ones got to do things that we don't allow our middle schooler to do. And I was just being transparent and said, we didn't do it really well the first time, and now we're going to do it better this time for you. She's like, well, great, thanks. But that's really the truth. And we're going to share, give you some tools and some skill sets to have those conversations because, again, incredible attractive nuisance, but also incredible teaching and learning tool. And if you can find that word that Jenny was saying, balance, it's extremely important.
So I wanted to just dig a little deeper into the digital citizenship. And so we brought a group together of teachers, administrators, teaching and learning department staff, technology staff, when we were just getting ready to roll out one-to-one to really define digital citizenship for the district. And this is the green sheet that you have in your handouts. And we wrestled with the definition, like if you Google digital citizenship, there are lots of definitions. But we were really trying to think, how can we create a definition? How can we have a definition that goes from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade? So 13-year span, lots of developmental levels, lots of different decision making depending on the level. And this is the definition we came away with. The actions of a critical consumer and positive contributor in a digital world. So we really thought about it in two ways, a critical consumer of information, but then also a positive contributor. So on one side, oh, that's great. There we go. On one side of the green sheet, you will see really our why statement. So in there, you will notice things. You'll notice that we really talk a lot about it being an ongoing, reflective conversation. We are very much, we talk a lot about we don't want a digital citizenship week. Because you're not a digital citizen for a week, you're a digital citizen all the time. And so how do we have that ongoing conversation that is reflective and really empowers students to be the thinkers around digital citizenship? So it's not, here are all the rules, it's where do we have our opportunities to exercise our decision making and our digital citizenship. And then on the other side, the back side of it, you will see that what we did was we unpacked what does it mean to be a critical consumer and what does it mean to be a positive contributor. And so different skills that are there. And what was really interesting is many of the critical consumer skills are literacy skills, things that we want our students to do from a literacy perspective. And so how do we really help students see that? And then positive contributor are many of those skills that when digital citizenship initially came out, that was what a lot of people focused on. But it's really a balance of the two, that whole idea of both of those pieces being digital citizenship skills. And so as a parent, what's a really good way to use this as a tool for thinking about what conversations do I need to have is, of those skills, what are ones that you talk about, with your kids? What are ones that you're like, ooh, I want to talk about that? Or, when they're making a project, do you notice if they're citing their sources or not? And what kind of conversation can you have? If they are looking up something, are they looking at what's the purpose of that website? If it's a .com, it's a commercial website. They're probably trying to sell you something. If it's a .org, it's an organization, so you need to find out about the organization. If it's a .gov, it's a governmental one. So how do we help our children really think about that? So utilizing this as a tool to really think about the actions of a digital citizen is really, really helpful. And I feel like I'm going to go to the next part. Okay. Any questions about the digital citizenship document before I move to the next part? Yeah.
This may be jumping the gun. Go for it. So I apologize. But for when you're in the academic setting talking about digital citizenship, we have conversations at home all the time. But when we're entering into that age where there is more of that academic peer review, so there's this social interaction online that is where people is kids are like some adults that say things online, they're saying real life because they know they shouldn't say. So is part of the digital citizenship and also helping teach them how to interact with that type of reaction from other people? Because we talk about it really on homework. For some reason, it seems to be sort of my son, the academic setting, he doesn't believe in anything I say, put it that way. You know what I mean? So the academic setting has a little bit more influence on selling those solutions. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And Rob's nodding his head. You want to go first?
Yeah, let me, so you heard me real quick. Yep,
I'll close that down.
Yeah. So the question was appropriateness of how kids dialogue with one another, right? Social media, whether they're different from when you're in front of someone or whether you're behind your screen.
How do they, because it's trying to teach a child what we are learning today as adults, how to react with that kind of commentary that sometimes can be inappropriate, and if it's in the academic setting, like what you're talking about, the writing of the stories in the review, that opens yourself up, which we have to really deal with that, but is there any instruction in school?
So from a foundational belief, when we started this committee that had the parents on and administrators, we actually got student voice. there's a piece we have to understand is there's no quick fixes to complex challenges, right? This stuff, the way the mind is created, is based on the tenets of neuroscience. I mean, it is. Synapses fire together, wire together, how kids are getting media. It's brain-based research behind it. So what we always say, we may not see the results of what's going on now in our district. I may not be able to see it right away in high school, but if elementary school teachers are starting it, there's a notion, those who tell the story define the culture, right? Those who tell the story define the culture. So if we're telling the stories in elementary school about everything with digital citizenship, and then they get to middle school and we're telling those stories and relating these things about how you're supposed to act appropriately, then we're telling them in high school, we're going to continue to grow the mindset of how we operate appropriately. The challenge is that the smartphone now has come on so quick, and I just gave you my example where I'm at. I had kids who just grew up at the initial stages of smartphones. Now I have one that's been around ever since in 6th grade, right? So it's just a different mindset. So I had to shift quickly, and it was tough. What we're looking at is trying to tell that story from the elementary school all the way through. So if we keep telling it over and over again, the expectation is going to become common practice and institutionalized. It's going to be difficult. But again, there's no quick fixes to this. And when we presented at the board, we said that. We have to give ourselves permission to see the growth from this, maybe not in months and weeks, but in years. But we're starting somewhere. That was the nature of why we pulled all these groups together to say, you know what, as a district, we've done all this great framework for teaching and learning. We have to do something with digital citizenship and get community involved in how we're going to do it. And again, the notion of having stories like this told, and then we keep doing it over and over again in the classroom. If we can coach up parents and give them tools how to do it at home, we're going to see the benefits from this down the road. Kind of answer your question?
It does. It's kind of like we didn't have that growing up, so maybe had we had that, we would be interacting differently as adults.
It's a totally different parenting skill set and teaching skill set that we're not used to. If you think of a teacher who's been teaching 30 years, who's everything with paper and pencil, right? This is a mindset shift in how we're delivering instruction. And we work through that, little by little. We talk about the sandwich, it's a pool, and you don't jump into the deep end with cinder blocks around your waist. You take steps in the shallow end, and you learn your skill set, and you continue support along the way. So in 5 years, that person's feeling much more comfortable. It's institutionalized behavior. It takes time. And the parenting part is no different. That takes time too.
Well, and I think about peer review, even, it was 30 years ago, but when I was in high school, and a peer review of a paper, it was face-to-face, but it was still incredibly vulnerable. Getting constructive criticism from your peers is super hard to take. And then you put it in an online setting, and now you don't even get the face-to-face sometimes interactions or the impact. So you think about that vulnerability too, and how do we help students see that the impact of their words are almost more because you don't get to see physically how it affects them, whereas you did when you talked face-to-face in a peer review. So it's helping them see that part too. Yeah. Any other questions, comments around digital citizenship? So now we're really going to move into kind of some tools. I mean, the digital citizenship definition is definitely a tool, but now we're going to move into some more. So as Rob said, we had a group of people that came together this summer, and this was really based on a recommendation from a guidance team last year. We had a digital distractions guidance team that came together and had a number of recommendations. And one was, would it be possible for there to be district expectations across all buildings at the elementary, middle, and high school level when it comes to utilizing digital tools in classrooms? So what could we have a common set of expectations? So we brought together teachers, administrators from across the district together, and the first thing that we did was we had tables talk about what do we believe when working with students that make a mistake or misstep. And these are the charts that were put together by the 5 tables that were there that day. And so you notice a lot of common words in there. You notice a lot of common phrases and things like that. So we put those together in a word cloud, and this is what it ended up being. And so what came out the most was that when a student makes a misstep, be it with technology or without, it's really an opportunity. It's an opportunity to do one of two things. Well, 2 things, not one of 2 things, both of them. but to help a student build their understanding and also to help build relationships. And that really became the foundation of our work when it came to developing digital expectations and how we respond, is that we wanted to help build student understanding and we wanted to help build relationships. That whatever we did those two things. And that really, to me, was really important. It was important to our group. And so we really started to utilize a mentoring approach. How do we move into really helping students understand? So like we were talking about here with the online discussions, how do we build understanding with that? So, when we think about things like restorative practices, it talks about the social discipline window. And so you notice in there that it has levels of control from low to high and levels of support from low to high. So when you have high levels of control, meaning that you are setting expectations, but also high levels of support, we're really working together with the students. And so when we think about that from a parenting perspective, anytime that we can work together with our kids to develop expectations, to develop understandings, to help through those missteps, we're going to keep building that along the way. So one of the article that you picked up is one of the handouts. It's called At Your Wit's End with a Screen Obsessed Kid. Read this. And it tells the story of a family with an elementary, middle school, and high school students. And they're not all the same story, which having multiple kids, not every child is the same. And so it's really what are ways that you can mentor through that. And they talk about mentoring and monitoring and that approach. So just thinking about that along the way is how can we continue to mentor and work with our kids. I will say that our conversations that we've had with our own children, as the years go on, and they weren't all like rainbows and unicorns. Like we had a lot of hard conversations, but now that they are older, it's really helped develop our relationships, being able to just continually have that open dialogue. So that whole approach with WITH is super important. So what we did with our digital expectations team is we established expectations across the board, which is the yellow packet. We developed it to support students as they make decisions, and we focused on balance, safety, and security. So just to make sure I reiterate that. So you'll notice that they're different at elementary, middle, and high school as far as the expectations. So the first page is elementary, the second page is middle, the third page is high school. You'll notice that they get shorter. Elementary has many more expectations, many more areas that we talk about. We go through the bus, recess, all of those kind of things. Middle school gets a little bit shorter, and high school's only one side of the page. So you'll notice that. But what we did was we really tried to focus on areas of a student's day. We really thought about that all the way through. And so you'll see things like in the classroom, in the cafeteria, in the bathroom, in all of those areas. And we also didn't just give the expectation, but why for those expectations. And so from a parenting perspective, this can be a really good resource when you are thinking about where do I begin, or what could be our next steps. It might be developing expectations at your house, in the common areas, like, at mealtime, like thinking about a student's day and then thinking about the day at, your life at home. What are the different areas that you need to address and talk about? Okay. So as you're reading them, think about what do you notice, what questions might you have, and how might you as a family develop your own expectations? Like what might be some things that you could do? So utilizing those for that, I think is really, really important. So I know that Rob and Roger were both on that digital expectations, like when we developed those. So if you want to talk about, I kind of floated through elementary, middle, and high, but you both stayed at your spots.
We had a consistency is key, whether you're at home or at school. So we had a consistent format throughout every one of our teachers about how it was delivered. and what word choice they were using in the presentation in terms of, so there was no ambiguity in what the expectations were for students. And the very, very important thing is that we told students that every teacher presented in the slides that this was generated from student voice. It really doesn't work when a bunch of adults tell students what they can and can't do. So when we got our student voice in this, we parlayed that and said this was generated. They understood the digital citizenship piece, that there was a need where we have to have balance in the classroom. And having student voice allows kids to buy in, right? And we share with them what the process was with the student voice to land at those slides that Jenny showed in the posters. We actually went so far at Eastview as we shrunk it down and put it in the back of every iPad, just as a reference point. So if a teacher ever had a concern, they could flip it over and say, hey, here's the expectations that we spoke about. And the other thing that we talked about is having a consistent format of meeting with every student, and I did it through 9th grade teams. So when every 9th grader came in, I spent the first week of school meeting with every 9th grade team and spending 40 minutes with them going over what it means to be a scholar and a learner at Eastview using your device and being a digital learner, okay, with the device. And it was twofold. One, I got to meet every freshman, right? So when I'm doing lunch duty, I know a lot of the kids. And the second part is we had a face-to-face conversation about what it looks, feels, and sounds like to have this device and what our expectations are carrying from middle school to high school. And they were some of the most rich conversations. And I always say, instead of telling, ask the kids a question. So one of the questions I'd ask them is, what do you think is fair balance? What do you guys think as new students at our school? What does balance look like in the classroom? And you really end up having some rich dialogue with kids. Kids will rise up to the expectation almost 100% of the time. And by allowing them to answer that question, the responses they gave us, they gave me at least, were pretty impressive. They get it. They just need some guidance. They just need some ownership. And at home too. Instead of telling Rachel, my 12, now 13-year-old last week, what she should do, I said, what do you think is fair? You know, Mom and I want to have good conversations with you. You don't want your phone in your face. You're looking at that rather than us. We have other family members around. What do you think is fair? Well, I don't know. Well, that's why I'm asking you. Well, we're going to put your phone down until you can come up with an answer. Let's talk about this. All right, and then we ended up having a good 45-minute dialogue. That's a form of a media plan, but it works when you ask that question and involve them in decision-making rather than telling them, whether it's the expectations of the building, or it's the use in the classroom, or it's the use at home. They tend to have ownership and they're more consistent with the behavior.
And like Rob was saying, we actually, the digital expectations work actually did start in the spring of last year because I went and interviewed different groups of students at elementary, middle, and high, and they all wanted expectations. They're like, I want to know when I go into this class, in this class, in this class, the expectations are the same. And they said, and we want them to be high expectations, just not so constricting that we don't have a voice. Like that was very much what they said about it, is they wanted expectations, they wanted to be expected at high levels, but they also didn't want it too constricting.
So last year, I was observing an English teacher, and the kids were in pair out, they were in groups, and I was just sitting with the group, listening to them, collaborating on something, and I said, hey, tell me about the device hanging up on the wall. So the teacher had, you can buy them on Amazon, it's pockets, 1 through 35, and the pockets go in there. And I said, I kind of knew what it was. I said, so tell me how it works. I said, well, Mrs. Smith, it's optional. So I said, where are your phones right now? They're in there. I said, well, how come? She goes, because it's just much easier for us to control ourselves when they're over there, right? Now, they didn't have to do that, but they knew that the teacher didn't want them to have them out. The tool is there, and you know what? I'm going to take advantage of it, and they put them in there. I wouldn't say everyone put them in there, but there were kids who rose to the expectation and said, you know what? I'm just going to put it in there. Because they understand the expectation, and it's one more tool to help them. They self-identify and they self-monitor themselves by understanding the clear expectation.
So I'm talking to my parents of elementary students right now. So one of the things that came out of the digital expectations work this summer was the teachers really said, we would really like some text that we could use as read-alouds to have conversation around digital decision-making and digital citizenship and digital expectations. So on the back table are the books that right now we have available at all of our elementary schools. But what it really does is it provides an avenue for that authentic conversation. So, you know, if you're ever looking for how can we get started or what can we do to have, you know, to spark some dialogue, there's some really good books in there, and I would say middle school and high school students, it would help generate conversation as well. Unplugged is a really good one, especially if balance is kind of your, it's kind of the sticky wicket at that time, it's the thing that's really challenging things at home. That one is a good one. You're Missing It is another really good one over there. There's one that has a series of different stories in there. So feel free at the end to go and take a look at those, but that's a really good way to really generate conversation in a way that doesn't feel like you're doing this and stop doing this. It's a way to really look at it through the eyes of characters and then be able to have those conversations around digital decision making. Another really good tool from a parent perspective is the family media plan. So this is, I'll show you at the end how to get to our district's website because I have it linked in there as well. But what I love about this is it walks you through the different components of developing a media plan. So I'm going to go there so that you can see what it looks like. Make it a little bigger. Okay, so you get to the website and here you have create your family media plan. And what you do is you put your child's name, and you can just do first name, you can do initial, whatever feels comfortable for you, but it doesn't go anywhere. It's really just for you. So if I do Roger, and I'm trying to do it one-handed, so this is fun. And then you say the age. So let's say 6 to 12 years. And then if I do Jenny, and then I'm going to do the 13 to 18 years because that's pretty much elementary all the way to high school. So we have 6 to 12, 13 to 8, and then you go next. And what it'll do is putting your kids, so this is 2, if you had more, then it would be more. But now it walks you through like screen-free zones. And what you do is if the bedroom's a screen-free zone, and you decide that as a family, you click the check mark. And you can decide that for children individually, you know, as a family, the kitchen or dining room table, and then you have the opportunity to type your own and add another. So you can really use this as the vehicle for your conversations. It goes to screen-free times, so you can say, you know, while doing homework, are we going to agree that while you're doing homework, you shouldn't have your cell phone because you're going to be doing your homework? Then you can click that. And so I'm just going to click a couple so you can see what it looks like while walking across the street would be a good one. Because they are showing some data that shows the distractions of a pedestrian and what it's doing. I would pick that one. Mealtime, family time, so you can really decide as a family. You also get type your own. And when you are doing in the range of 13 to 18 years old, while driving comes up. So for your, you know, if your children are driving age, then you can have that conversation there. Device curfews and where the device will be charged. This is probably, to me, the biggest thing that you should have a conversation with, period. So wherever the device is going to be charged, and I will give you my advice, not the child's bedroom. So that's my biggest way. If there's anything you walk away with, don't charge them in the bedrooms. It just makes life easier. But having that conversation around where it's charged, I always say like common areas, but here the parent's bedroom is another one. But then you can make those decisions. And then here is about, you know, when we have recreational screen time, we will, and you can talk about co-viewing or co-playing if it's video games and things like that. And then when we have recreational screen time, we will, and then you can talk and agree upon that. I'm just going to give a couple more clicks and get down here to balancing online and offline. So, you know, by decreasing screen time, we will have more time for sleeping, reading, doing hobbies I like. And then it talks about media manners, so you can have a conversation around that, and digital citizenship, and safety. So it has all of these different parts that allows you to have a conversation as a family. What's nice is when you get all the way done, you just go up to File and you go Print. And what ends up happening is whatever you checked becomes the media plan. And then you can print that out and post that somewhere. It's a way for you to really have that contract as a family and be able to come back to it. And what I really like is at the end, where it had me print, when I printed the directions at the bottom, I have to do all that scrolling, it says, post it where everybody can see it, and then it says, come back to revise your family plan as often as you need to. So you can come back and revise it. You can actually create a login so you can come back and just modify your last one if you want to. But to me, this is a great vehicle for those conversations. It's basically you're doing the digital expectations, but for your family. And it walks you through so you don't have to remember, did I remember to talk about this and this? You really get to, this gets to really help be the driver of the conversation. So I highly recommend it. Let me get back here. So the pink sheet that you have has many of the questions that I have up here. But I always think questions are great. So the media plan, if you're not going to do the media plan, you can utilize these. You can utilize these with the media plan. Lots of options. But we did this in our areas of focus that we have for digital citizenship. So responsible use, many of these go along with the family media plan. Where should the devices be charged at night? What can devices be used for at home? You need, we don't want to assume. We want to have the conversation so that our expectations we all have together as a group and a family. When it comes to digital footprint, so digital footprint is really like what you post. And I think probably one of the biggest areas where we really need to be conscious of, especially because this is probably what we post the most, are pictures. So when they get to having that didn't sound very good. When they do get to the point where they might have a social media account like Instagram, Snapchat, things like that, it's really thinking about what do you notice in the background of the picture? What is it telling about you? If you're posting a picture on Instagram and it's saying the school that you go to, do you want to give that information? Is that information that you want out there public? So helping our kids really see that posting, we have to think about the whole picture. So how do we think about that digital footprint and what message is that sending? What is it really telling? Safety online and privacy. So I don't have questions around this because I just think it's something as a parent, keeping our kids safe is, that's our first job, no matter what. So it's how do we help our kids really think about what is their private information? I always say even all the way till they're 18, really getting in the habit of asking permission before creating accounts, not because they need your permission, yes or no, but they need your guidance in the creation of those accounts. They need, like, a username. You really have to think through how much of yourself do you want to tell in your username. Password development. They need guidance in that. So it's not necessarily that they're coming to us for permission, yes or no. It's really about how as a family can we have conversations around that, and then how can we help them develop it so it keeps them safe. So just thinking around that. Really encouraging our kids to really reach out if something is bothering them or something they feel like something is infringing on their safety. How can they go to a trusted adult? I think having that conversation is really important, and that could happen in a texting conversation. They can be feeling bullied. We need to really help them see that if that happens, they need to reach out to adults. It could be you as parents, but it could also be a trusted adult like an aunt or an uncle. So thinking about that, really helping them think about their circle. And then understanding COPA and FERPA guidelines. So this is my COPA and FERPA 101. I try to put it, it's a complex, so I try to put it in as simple of terms as I can. So COPA is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. Really, this is about knowing that kids under 13 should not just be able to create any account that they want. The COPA guidelines really help us with that. It gives us that, you know, so for example, a Snapchat account. Really, you have to be 13 years of age or older to have a Snapchat account. And the reason is because you have to give information about yourself to create the account, which means that we want to make sure that children under 13 are protected. Now, if they turn 13, that doesn't mean they have to have one. It's not like you have to give permission for them to have everything. That, to me, is more of an open up for a conversation. But COPA really allows, if you have children under 13, allows you to say no because the guidelines tell you that they shouldn't have an account and the company shouldn't let them have an account. So that is how COPA works. FERPA is really around data around children, and that's to 18. So things like report card records, things like the work that they create. So when we go into an app review process for self-service, that's one of my, I've taken it on just as a duty because I think it's really important. But I always look at terms of service to make sure, A, is it abiding by COPA? And if it is, then our under 13s can use it. If it isn't, then they can't. So I've had to say no to things that disappoint teachers, but it's okay because it's for the safety of children and I will do it. FERPA, what I'm looking for is who owns the content that's created. If the student doesn't own the content that's created, then we won't use that tool or that app. Because if a student created it, they should get to own it. So that's really the difference between COPA and FERPA. So that's my little 101 on that. So how does that help me as a parent? So if your children are under 13, you get to say, you can say, Mrs. Huling said I can say this, but you get to say no to things like a YouTube channel. You get to say no to things like Instagram if they're under 13. But if they're 13 or older, it doesn't mean you have to say yes to them either. That to me is about opening up a dialogue for a conversation on whether they feel ready. And it's really about being ready to be public. So, you know, when we were growing up, we were private by default. And we had to do a lot of effort to be public. For our kids now, they're public by default. And they have to do a lot of work to be private. So it's really about having that conversation about how public do you want to be? And then that will help decide if and when. Look at terms of service. They're getting better at writing them in terms that most people can understand and you don't have to have a law degree, which is great. But there's certain things that I search for. I search for the number, I do like the Control F. And then I search for things like 13, 18. Marketing, I want to know if they're going to market information from the user. So I look that up. So just thinking about that. And then if your child does, you know, if you do decide as a family to go start using social media, follow them. And be really transparent about why you're following them. And following to guide and protect. You know, it's not to be critical of everything that you post, but I might ask a question about it. But it's really to guide and protect you. And if they know that up front, they're going to be okay with it for the most part.
And when I have this conversation with our high school kids, our freshmen, I tell them it's not your fault. You make mistakes. And the reason why, because your frontal lobe isn't developed yet. And that's really the truth. And the frontal lobe is where decisions are made. And I'm very transparent with them. So what we're going to do is we're going to help you not get in trouble. And how are we going to do that? We're going to give you some guidelines to help guide you. And then when you do trip and fall, which you probably will sometimes, which happens, we're going to pick you up, brush you off, we're going to help you get smarter, right? But being just transparent with them. And that's why, because kids, their mind is not developed yet, and they sometimes can't make the best decisions. So these things are there to guide them. And one more step as a district that we said, you know what? It's important that we share this with kids and parents so they understand that.
So another, I didn't bring copies of this, but it's something you can look up to, but the American Academy of Pediatrics wrote a position paper called Media Use in School-Age Children and Adolescents, and these are some of their guidelines that I think are super helpful. So instead of thinking about how much time you're on a device or on TV or on a screen, really thinking about, are you getting an hour of activity every day? And are you getting 8 to 12 hours of sleep? So let that be the conversation. It's more of a way to build the practices and the habits we want them to have than the deficit thinking of, how do I get you off of this? So thinking about it in that way. It's recommended that there's no screens in the bedroom, so I'm totally with that one. I think it's a place to sleep, and let's keep it that way. Designate media-free times and locations, so that's just like the family media plan that we walked through. Continue to have that ongoing communication and ongoing dialogue. And then develop a network of trusted adults. And I think this one's really important. I really liked that and appreciated that they put that in there. So having aunts and uncles and older brothers and sisters that are also part of that network for them so that they can help give guidance. It becomes that community. So just thinking about how can we continue to build that community of trusted adults when they're starting to navigate social media or trying to navigate those different types of things, so that it's not always our voices as parents saying it, but how can we together as a community say it. A position paper called Media Use in School-Age Children and Adolescents, and these are some of their guidelines that I think are super helpful. So instead of thinking about how much time you're on a device or on TV or on a screen, really thinking about, are you getting an hour of activity every day? And are you getting 8 to 12 hours of sleep? So let that be the conversation. It's more of a way to build the practices and the habits we want them to have than the deficit thinking of, how do I get you off of this? So thinking about it in that way. It's recommended that there's no screens in the bedroom, so I'm totally with that one. I think it's a place to sleep, and let's keep it that way. Designate media-free times and locations, so that's just like the family media plan that we walked through. Continue to have that ongoing communication and ongoing dialogue. And then develop a network of trusted adults. And I think this one's really important. I really liked that and appreciated that they put that in there. So having aunts and uncles and older brothers and sisters that are also part of that network for them so that they can help give guidance. It becomes that community. So just thinking about how can we continue to build that community of trusted adults when they're starting to navigate social media or trying to navigate those different types of things, so that it's not always our voices as parents saying it, but how can we together as a community say it. So before I move into the monitoring tools, on the district website, if you go to academics and then down to digital learning, we did a big revamp of our one-to-one parent website. So this page goes through and really lays out the framework that we talked about at the start of the evening. But then if I click on this button, that'll take me to the one-to-one iPad parent resources. And in here, we have parent communications that we're going to be doing throughout the year. So our first one was in January. It was around responsible use. And then down here are beginning of the year resources, and then in the digital citizenship guidance and restrictions button, then there is the developing a family media plan. So I put the link there, but also many of the things that we talked about tonight are also on this page. This video is a screencast of different talks that we've done throughout the last year and this year. But there's buttons around like beginning of the year resources, caring for the iPad, but it's that digital citizenship guidance and restrictions that really has a lot of what we talked about tonight. So this can be a really helpful resource to come back to, and we'll keep building on this as we continue to have conversations and dialogue and things like that. So feel free to come back to it. All right. So I'm going to move on to the white paper, the white one page that you picked up as one of the handouts. So we've talked a lot about mentoring. Questions we can ask, ways that we can engage in different dialogue and things like that. But we also, as parents, want to be able to monitor to get some data around what to have conversations about. So there's things that we do from a district perspective to help monitor and bring safety to the iPads. And some of these can transfer if if your child has an iPhone or if you have an iPad at home, you can utilize a lot of these tools. I know if it's something that is an Android device or something like that, you can also do that as well. So one of the things that we do on all of our student iPads is we put on a web filter called Securely. And Securely follows the iPad. So it's going to work here at school, but it's also going to work at home. It's going to work at their friend's house. It's the web filter that is always on. And how web filters work is they filter based on categories. So we have different categories that we block. So you see things like gambling, gaming, chat messaging, those types of things. Those are all blocked by category. Also with Securely, a safe search is put on. So that means that students aren't just going to have full range of a Google search. It's going to filter out content that would be deemed unsafe. And then also with YouTube, that automatically puts it in a restricted mode, which means they don't see the comments. It means that it limits what content they have access to, things like that when it's on the iPad. So we try our best to try to restrict content that they shouldn't have access to. Now, one thing to remember is that filters are not 100%. And so it's a constant kind of monitor and adjust, and sometimes we have to let Securely know that some things got through, and then they help us out with getting that blocked. So it's never 100%, but if you ever notice something and that needs our attention, never hesitate to contact your child's school. A couple other things that we do on the iPads is they do not have access to the App Store. They have access to what's called self-service. So it's a limited app store. All the apps that are in there go through our app review process that I talked about earlier. So we make sure, and we can really differentiate that. So our K-3 students, the iPads that are in those classrooms, because we have 5 in each of our 2-3s, we'll have 5 in each of our K-1s next year. But their self-service looks much different than a high school student's self-service. They don't have access to the exact same apps. It's what apps are appropriate to them. Same with our 4th and 5th graders. It might look different than our middle schoolers. Even in middle school, 6th and 7th grade have access to certain apps, but 8th graders might have access to a couple more apps because they're over 13. So we're able to do that type of differentiation. We're also able to differentiate if a student shouldn't have access to a certain app or should have access to a certain app, depending on different parts of their journey. We can actually differentiate that by student when needed. So that is really helpful. We also have restrictions that we put on the iPads, like for example, they can't airdrop an image from one student to another for a lot of different reasons. So we have turned that off. We've also turned off things like Siri, we've turned off iMessage, FaceTime, everything that aligns with our district policies. That helped us make the decision of whether to keep it on or turn it off. So thinking about that, before I move on, thinking about that, what that means that you have some things that you could restrict on your child's iPhone or iPad to kind of help out with those things. So the reason I wanted to give you this information is that there are possibilities. When you think about web filtering, really talking to whoever your Wi-Fi provider about what are your options from a parenting perspective to limit content. That's a good conversation to have and find out what are your options. And it's device specific and it's whatever your Wi-Fi provider is. So I'd love to say there's one way, but every one is a different journey. So I would say contact them if you're interested. If you have an Apple device, be it an iPhone or an iPad, screen time is a great option. It gives you the opportunity to monitor and restrict. So I'm just going to talk about a couple tools that are in there. The one big thing is that if you're going to set it up, you're going to need to do a passcode, and you will need to remember it. If it's on a school iPad, we can clear that passcode, so always realize that. But that is one thing, you don't want to share your passcode with your child, because that would totally defeat the purpose of actually doing it. So just to keep that in mind. So probably my two favorite tools of screen time. My favorite one is the monitoring one. So how screen time works is once you turn it on, you get to monitor how long your child's on it each day and what they're on. So you could see, are they on Safari, and if so, how long? You can see, like here, in this case, I was on Explain Everything. This is mine. I was on Explain Everything. I was working on a project. But that is like a screencasting app. That's why it says 3 hours, because I was working on a project. But you see the different apps. You can also see it from category, but for me, I like the apps view better. You can see it over the course of a week. You can see it over the course of a day, so that you can see what times of the day are they spending on it the most. And then you can, like, if it's always from, the hour that they're home by themselves and you're not there, that's a good data for a conversation. Like, you can have a conversation around that.
Jenny,
Yep.
for us, this was a game changer. The conversations plus this was really a game changer. Before screen time was out, there was an app called Unglue, which did this, and then Apple got really robust with it, so I stopped using Unglue. But when I was looking for a solution to figure out how to help balance the use at home, I went to the Unglue app and I started to read about it, and it had a 2.5 rating. So I'm like, well, that's not that great. But it had like 1,000 ratings. So when I clicked on it, it was interesting. All the kids gave it a 1, all the parents gave it a 5. So it ended up right in the middle, right? So because it was a device that allowed a parent to monitor completely, now we can do it with this. And it's really been an opportunity to have some really rich conversation with Rachel, our youngest one. The two older ones are on their own, but the younger one about what's fair, how much time do you need. If you're doing things at home and you're helping out, I'll give you more time. If you're not doing the things you want, you don't earn that added piece. So it's been good. So there's a couple things in here Jenny will go through, but I just wanted to comment from a parenting perspective. It works really well. It's really been a thing that's offered some good dialogue and a great tool to monitor and adjust accordingly as needed.
And I would say, so for our family, all of us have screen time on our devices, all 4 of us. And what's really interesting is Sunday, we always get the notification of, has your screen time gone up or down? If so, how much? What's your average daily? And it's a conversation at our house. Like it's gone up this many percent, or it's gone down this many percent. And then looking like last year when it was the polar vortex, which was about right now last year, and mine went up, and my daughter's like, because we were inside all the time. And I was like, oh yeah, that's it. So it's a good way to monitor and really think about it and have some reflective dialogue. And I would say being vulnerable and putting yourself in that reflective dialogue as a parent is really helpful, because they get to see that, you have some struggles sometimes with it too, or you have to think about it too. It really helps that be a collaborative conversation. The other one I really like is downtime.
I was just going to add that it's just sort of like you're building in a good habit of actually looking at it. Right?
Yes.
Yes. I think about all this and just think about how challenging this is going to be to change my habits and model different things too, because my phone's right by my bed and all that sort of stuff too. So
yeah,
it'll be good, but you're right, it's going to be hard.
Well, and it's one step at a time. Yeah. I say all of these things are one step at a time. You can't change habits overnight. It takes ongoing dialogue and reflection and self-reflection too. So yeah, absolutely. Downtime's another one of my favorites. What this does is it basically puts the device to sleep. So it might be for some of our elementary families, they have turned it off at 9 o'clock or an hour before bedtime, so maybe like 8 o'clock. They turn on downtime until an hour after their child gets up. And then that way the device can't be used during that time. So when you sleep, the device sleeps. And then if you think about not having blue light for that hour before you go to bed, so really having that conversation about how can we turn on downtime so that sleep is really important. So I really like that one too.
And a regular application isn't, my wife was saying Rachel was always scrambling to get to the bus, right? So I said, here's the deal. I adjusted her downtime, less in the morning. Imagine that. She wasn't late or scrambling anymore. Just that adjustment in time, it was an attractive nuisance. So rather than getting ready and getting prepared, she was messing around on her phone, doing whatever, and then scrambling the last 5 minutes before she had to get on the bus. We made the adjustment and said, if you can control this, we will put the time back. And allow her to own that responsibility.
So we are at the conclusion of our time. So where to begin? I would say one of the biggest ones is to start by developing a family media plan. Use that link. Engage in conversation. That ongoing dialogue is super important. Understand, monitor, and restriction tools that you have available, and utilize that one-to-one parent resources website. So I'm going to open it up if anybody wants to add anything in, or if you have any questions. Anything I forgot?
I think I'll just mention one thing. It's, I think all these things that Jenny said, we're giving you as parents permission to, help manage your students' iPads. At conferences, parents come in and I'll say, it's okay if you don't allow them to use it, during this time. And they almost, I can, because they think that it's, it's a school tool and so forth. So they don't think they can do that. But we're we're all in this together really to help them manage. And it's interesting having those conversations and even reminding them about that common place to charge their device. Many parents don't even think about that, about having that plan about, where do you charge it? And I know the students that come in and 3 out of the 5 days don't have their iPads charged. I'm thinking, how can we help them to get that family plan together? Because if there's that common place, maybe by the backpack on a counter where they go to, it's plugged in at night, they get up and they take it with them. It's really helping them just form some good routines. And it's going to go from the home right to the school and, from the school to the home. So whatever we can do to kind of help out on both ends, I think is our goal.
Any questions? Yes.
For the screen time, so you can add the school iPad to that your screen time account as well as.
So you can't add it to your family one, but you can set it up on the iPad, just directly on the iPad. Because they're monitored through our district server, you wouldn't be able to add it to your family media plan, but you could set it up and then be able to, you always can go into the iPad, so you could always go in and access it that way.
The iPad is separate, so you'd have to pick the iPad up, know the code, and make the adjustments. On our cell phones, for kids who have cell phones, Rachel could be at her friend's house and say, hey, I ran out of screen time, can you give me more? I can be anywhere, and I can get on and give her more, or I say, no, you didn't plan well.
Okay.
Sometimes I do that.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And so when the phones are on your own network, like through Verizon or whoever, you can control their screen time remotely. You can take it away, or you can give them more remotely, and you as the parent. When you set up their phones, it asks you, is this your child's phone or your phone? You click your child's phone, and then you put the password in. The iPad itself, you have to do it by holding their iPad and putting in the password and making the adjustments right on their iPad. You can't do it remotely from your device because it's on a different network.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean when a game changer. It's really cool.
So they find out your code.
Yeah, you don't want to tell them your code.
Yeah, don't tell them your code. Put your hand over here.
Oh, you're rolling his eyes. That's all right.
Any other questions? Yes?
So high schoolers, can they access Facebook and such on their iPad?
So they can through like the web browser. They don't have the Facebook app available in self-service, but they can through the web browser. That isn't blocked on our security network. Yeah.
We're finding in high school, kids primarily use their iPad for school because they have their personal device, which is their phone. So it's really, we don't really come across many issues with the iPad causing a distraction. It's primarily their teaching and learning tool, or I should say the learning tool.
Well, thank you so much. I hope this was helpful. Feel free, if you want to come down to ask questions, feel free to take a look at the books. But thank you so much just for being an engaging audience. I really appreciate it. So have a good time.